Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. In last week's edition of Challenge 2.0, we began a conversation with two highly experienced Western Washington law enforcement officials. One a retired prosecutor, the other a retired police chief, are deeply concerned over the long-term impact of aggressive seizures of alleged illegal immigrants and refugees. Today, we continue that conversation. So as I mentioned in our introduction, we are in the midst of a very weighty topic in terms of ICE raids, Border Patrol raids, their perception, the way they're being carried out, and we have two excellent guests here, and I'm so grateful that you both agreed to continue this conversation. Bonnie Bowers, retired Anacortes Police Chief, and also a graduate of the FBI National Academy. Bonnie, thanks so much for making the trip to our studio and being a part of this. And John Ladenburg, retired Pierce County Prosecutor and also Pierce County Executive, that found yourself sitting in situations that allow you to give a lot of perceptions and guidance in terms of what we're seeing now. Thank you for joining us on this as well. When we concluded our discussion last week, we were talking about how after the shootings in Minneapolis, that it seemed like they hadn't even had an opportunity to clear the scene, and already characterizations were being made of the people that were shot and killed in both of these incidents as being domestic terrorists and assassins. And Bonnie, maybe you can lead us off in terms of what was your reaction as a retired police chief and police officer when you heard those?
Well, that term terrorist struck a chord with me, because a terrorist is someone who, either a group or an individual, who seeks to elicit fear through excessive violence and force against non-combatants, against civilians. And in looking at especially the Minnesota cases, these are protesters with constitutional rights to legally voice their opinion. And then I thought about what is happening with the ICE raids, and I thought, this is an organized group who's using excessive force against non-combatants to change the ideology, policy, or the laws of a nation. So I think you could flip that definition, and I was struck by that.
Yeah.
It was those officials who use those terms, assassin and terrorist, that's over the top. And it's just not professional, and probably the worst what we see of government.
John, what's your reaction, not only from your legal experience, but also as an elected official?
Well, I'm concerned, as I said before, about losing faith in government. Now, we've seen that increasing over the years in our nation and the time I've been involved in government. And it's a great concern to me, because if people lose faith in their government, then soon society itself starts to break down, not just the government. The government would be the last thing to actually break down, but the schools will break down, transportation network, the economy, all those things, because there's no faith in the fact that we live in a fair society anymore. And so I'm very concerned about that in terms of a person who's been involved in government all my life and my degrees in political science, that I see these kinds of actions of having a very bad impact on people's faith in government. And you see those kind of comments on social media. You see it everywhere nowadays, and it's of great concern. And it isn't just the shootings and the killings. I mean, they're doing all kinds of other actions that just jump out at you. You see an ICE agent cross the street and pepper spray directly into someone's face from this far away.
Yeah.
Completely something you're trained not to do with pepper spray or any other kind of non-lethal force. The agent in that is creating the violence. They're inciting, like a terrorist organization. They're trying to incite the crowd back against them. I think that we need to be able to restore order, and ICE is going to need to be completely reformed into either a real law enforcement agency or hand over these duties to real law enforcement, who would not do. I mean, I don't know anybody in law enforcement who would defend that kind of action, inciting members of the crowd. And I know a lot of people in law enforcement who would have stopped that individual from doing it.
Yeah.
They literally wouldn't let another officer go do that. And they would pull them aside and say, well, what are you doing? You're doing the exact wrong thing. I don't see that in the videos. I see just the opposite, them clapping or encouraging that kind of activity. So it is a long way downhill, and we really need to be concerned.
Well, the next stage of this is, after these incidents happened, that the federal government not only refused to cooperate in any investigation, but they've actually blocked those investigations. Have you ever witnessed that, either one of you, before? And what's your take on that? What's your reaction?
Never. And if you want to solve crime, you cooperate with the federal agencies, and the federal agencies cooperate with state and local. Because sometimes it takes all those resources to take care of an issue, a criminal issue. And this type of non-communication, I've never experienced it. And it's damaging the process, and I think it's making us less safe in America.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, we had coordinated task forces where we'd sit down. I had federal, agents on the drug task force locally, and I think they are in most of them. And we would deal with it all the time. And you would let other agencies know what you're doing. Back when ICE was operating here in the proper manner in Washington State, ICE would tell us they're going to do an enforcement at this apartment complex or something. Why? Because if it goes bad for them, they want the local police to back them up. And that's what we would do. We would back them up. And so they knew that they could go in and do an arrest, and if something got out of hand or violent, they could call in the local police, who would be right there to protect them from any violence, and because they typically were not armed. And so it's completely different now. It's completely different. This is not the enforcement we ever saw. And you have to coordinate because it's dangerous. It's dangerous that they're going out there. And imagine one of these incidents where they're taking a battering ram and knocking in a door, claiming they have an administrative warrant, which is something that doesn't exist. But nevertheless, they're doing a warrantless search of a house, and they're breaking down a door with a battering ram. What if that first officer through the door gets shot and killed by the homeowner, who doesn't know what's going on, but is armed? Now, what's a jury going to do? You going to take that homeowner in front of a jury and convince 12 citizens that person who had armed people breaking down their door of their home without a warrant, that person is guilty of a crime? I don't think it's going to work. And I did criminal defense for 12 years too. So I've done both for over 30 years. You have dangerous situations that they're creating, and I'm afraid that they're going to get in a situation like that where somebody who doesn't know who they are or what they're doing, but is afraid because they're armed people coming after them, shoots and kills one of them.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit surprised it hasn't already happened. And when that happens, then that's the next stage that you go to. And not having coordination with other law enforcement agencies, federal and local, is just stupid.
The Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, has said that ICE agents and Border Patrol agents that are involved in these actions are immune from prosecution.
Nonsense.
Nonsense.
And I'll tell you this, there's no statute of limitations on murder. So 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years from now, a prosecutor in Minnesota could bring a case if they find the evidence at that time. They can investigate later. And I tell you what, no conspiracy works with more than one person. People in those crowds that saw what happened and other agents will at some point tell the truth. It will come out. And that's the problem, is that justice delayed is justice denied. And they're delaying it, but they aren't necessarily going to eliminate it, because most of the serious criminal activity has either a very long statute of limitations or none at all. And so I think the effort by the president and his staff was to have a big show that we're doing things differently and we're much tougher than prior presidents and prior administrations, and we are going to crack down on illegal immigration and terrorist immigration. And that was the story they put out.
It's backfiring.
It's backfiring big time because they, put this agency in charge, tried to make them look like an occupying force, sent them, states away, and the violence. Unfortunately for them, they weren't thinking through the idea that everybody has a camera with them today. Everybody's got a camera with them. And so right away, the first thing started happening, pictures, then videos. Then everybody started showing up with their cameras and videotaping them all the time. As soon as you get out of your car, officer from ICE, I'm going to videotape you, I'm going to walk behind, And they weren't anticipating that. They didn't anticipate it. Local law enforcement would have, because they're wearing cameras all the time anyway. So they've gotten used to the idea that they're on camera, and they want to be on camera. Because 99% of the time proves that they were right, that they weren't lying about what you did. And so, I think that they misjudged that terribly, and now it's rolling back on them, and I think that they're going to have to roll this back seriously. I see they're sending a lot of the people out of, Minnesota and back home. I think they're going to have to restructure, and I think they're going to have to do it, quietly, because they don't want to admit they're wrong. CBS reported today, and I didn't mean background on it, but I saw it real quickly, that they had arrested in some project 400 people in Idaho, and that 300 of them turned out to be citizens.
At the horse race, yeah, I saw that.
300
Oh,
citizens.
yes.
And of the 100 that weren't citizens, nobody was charged with an immigration violation. 5 were charged with gambling violations. So now,
What was the color of their skin?
Well, yeah, probably. But in the money point, how much did it cost to send agents to arrest 400 people, take them into custody, handle them, remove from custody, another 100 people that you were not citizens to determine that they are here legally, apparently. And then, so that had to have cost tens of millions of dollars, easily, to do that. The next cost is going to be 300 citizen lawsuits against the government for wrongful arrest. You watch, over the next decade, we are going to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in damages because of ICE. No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. Because those lawsuits, more than half of them are going to be settled right away because there's video. There's video of the ICE guy spraying the guy in the face. No, we're going to pay a big price for that kind of nonsense, and not just in government trust, in real money.
President Trump was quoted as saying, civil rights are harming people. What are your reactions? I mean, that's out of the Bill of Rights.
I'd love to take that one. First of all, he's confused about civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights has to do with equity, equality, fair housing, Voting Rights Act. Civil liberties have to do with the Bill of Rights, your Constitution, what you are guaranteed, what the government is going to protect for you. So we protect your freedom of speech. We protect your freedom of assembly. So him saying that our rights, even our liberties, harm people is just absolutely ridiculous. The harm here is that we're not protecting people's civil liberties correctly. In fact, we are harming their civil liberties. I hear the administration talking a lot about what's moral, and I'm having a hard time squaring these policies that ICE has to what's moral and what's legal in our country.
John?
Yeah, I agree 100%. That it's just a disgusting statement for a government official or anyone to make. I mean, it sounds like the kind of chant that people who want to destroy the government would say. Our government is different because we have rights built into it, and that was not accidental. I mean, the Constitutional Convention didn't have that Bill of Rights in there, and a number of states said, whoa, led by Virginia, saying, oh, we want rights enumerated right in the Constitution so they can't be taken away by a government later. That's why they're in there. And that's why the Bill of Rights has protected Americans all these years. Our civil rights are the foundation of America.
So 2 years, 4 years, 5 years from now, we're out of this situation. What sort of damage the experience of what we're seeing with the ICE raids, the Border Patrol raids, what damage is that going to do to the ability of law enforcement agencies at any level to either be able to prevent crime or investigate crime? Is that going to have a negative effect on that?
It is. It absolutely is. I think back about the first shootings that we saw by police, Trayvon Martin, certainly the shootings in Minneapolis, and across the country, and no community seemed to be immune from that. That lack of trust was significant and impacted the way we do our jobs, even at our level of enforcement in a small town. And I know that in Washington State, we worked very hard with the Criminal Justice Training Commission, former Sheriff Sue Rohr, who was in charge of that. We started teaching a different curriculum and teaching courses on bias and things that we believed are innate in human beings to help officers understand what was happening and what the public was viewing, right? Either if it was a correct assumption or not. So now we've worked so hard to regain that trust in so many ways. And now we have this new issue. And frankly, it will take time because the public does not differentiate between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. And so the officers in the smallest town in America are going to have that same level of distrust that these federal agents have brought to their communities. And you said it best, when you have officers that are from your community, that police your community, that see the same people day in and day out, that helps restore that trust and keep that trust. In the larger agencies where you won't always see the same officer on your street corner, it's going to take time to rebuild that relationship.
John, Pierce County is a very diverse area ethnically. What effect do you think that's going to have in terms of getting groups to cooperate that might already be suspicious?
It's very negative, and it's going to take a long time to recover from this. The problem is that law enforcement works because the public trusts law enforcement, and what people don't think about, and this is, I think, will lead to an increase in crime. Why? Because people won't be reporting it because they don't trust it. I'll give you an example. Years ago, when we had the large influx of people from Vietnam and Cambodia, refugees came in. A lot of them came to Pierce County, and we welcomed them there. And they, unfortunately, came from an area where you couldn't trust the government. So they would not report crime in their area. We, looking at stats, we came to the community and said, either you're very, very lucky that there's no burglaries happening in your neighborhoods, or we're not getting the reports. Why? Right. And they said, well, these people don't trust government. Where they come from, if they went to government, sometimes they got killed. Sometimes they got arrested. They certainly didn't get helped. And so their attitude about government was stay away from government. And that's, law enforcement works because just the opposite. We want people to come to us. Law enforcement should not be an occupying force that's demanding this by force, but rather a helping force. And we want the people, all the people, to trust government. So now you're going to drive up the number of people that doesn't trust government, and that's going to lead to more criminal activity because we won't know about it, we can't do anything about it.
Right.
And that leads to more armed citizens, more vigilante work, all that kind of stuff. I think you're going to see increases in that, and it's unfortunate. It's going to take years to live it down.
Well, as we speak right now, it's unlikely that these activities by ICE and Border Patrol are going to go away. What can be done by local law enforcement officials in terms of protecting their citizens and their right to exercise their First Amendment rights?
That's a great question. In a community and in Skagit County, we are able to meet with the leaders of some of our protest movements that are happening now, and they plan and coordinate together. Several years ago, we had a large-scale demonstration in Anacortes about petroleum products, and it took planning and coordination with our local and state officers, as well as the leaders of that organization. Number one, to provide them safe access to the areas that they could protest in, and number two, to coordinate our response if things did go bad. So there's an opportunity for those groups to meet with local law enforcement and local leaders not only to keep themselves safe, but to make sure that the public is well informed as well.
What are local law enforcement officials perhaps anticipating there might be activity? What can they do? What parameters might they be able to set to prevent this reaction between ICE and local protesters?
Well, I think that what ought to happen, and I think law enforcement is probably already talking about this, is that if ICE is going to have some big operations, here locally, whether it's here or Eastern Washington, wherever, that local police defend the protesters. And I would tell the protesters, let us know, and we will have officers on the scene between you and ICE. Local officers on the scene in uniform with badges that will be between you and ICE to make sure that your protest is protected by local police. And I would intercede in the middle.
That's an important point, I think, maybe even to reiterate, is let's say you're either a protester or you're organizing a protest, would be key points that you would suggest they make as part of their checklist before they actually have that. And perhaps you could repeat that, and then Bonnie, I'd like your commentary on that too.
I would encourage everybody who's doing those kinds of things to talk to the local police, let them know your schedule, let them know where you're going to be, and in some cases you need a permit to be in a certain place, and you tell the protest, stay there, protest there, don't go over there across the street and attack ICE. We're going to let you, we'll arrest you for doing that, but we'll protect you so you can be concerned that you're not going to get attacked by anybody from that agency. And so put local police in between the protesters and ICE and let people see that they can trust their own police.
Bonnie, any further insights on that?
Absolutely. If there was a checklist, check in with local officials, local law enforcement. Do we need a permit? And permits are relatively easy to get. And keep that communication open. I know that we have in the area where I live, any demonstration that we have law enforcement show up, and their primary role there is to protect the protesters.
Right.
And people know that.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole reason to have permits. People say, why do I need a permit? So that we know, government knows, law enforcement knows, so we can make sure your rights are protected, that we don't have opposing groups, fighting with each other. You can have your proposal and your proposal exactly opposite. We're going to keep you apart so we don't end up with fights going on, but you both can protest. The police will be in between you and danger. And that's what we want people to see, that yes, you can trust law enforcement, and that's their job here locally, and they will be happy to do it. So, let them know.
The other thing that I find really helpful is when they have captains who are inside the organization, who are trained and who are identifiable. And I know in Anacortes, when we have our intersection protest almost every weekend, they will walk by and say, you need to be on the sidewalk. You need to be off the street. Your sign might be a little bit offensive. You might think differently next weekend. So there are those types of individuals and leaders within an organization who can be your watchdogs to make sure that nothing gets out of hand.
One of the words that we hear a lot of over the last 8 to 12 years has been patriot and patriotism. And I think the president responded to some criticism and outrage over the ICE and Border Patrol raids of saying, let our patriots do their jobs. Do they and their behavior exemplify patriotism to you? And I guess I'd ask, what would be your definition of patriotic action or a patriot?
I think a patriot is somebody who believes in the ideals of this country, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and you and I have both taken an oath to protect and defend those rights. It's somebody who is not loyal to one political party or person. They pledge their allegiance to the Constitution. They understand that there is constructive dissent in our country and free speech, and we honor that and we protect that. And someone who's willing to fight and die to protect those rights. That is what I consider to be a patriot.
John?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. True patriots are people that want to not only live in a free society in America, but promote that. and make sure it stays, make sure it lives. Because as Franklin said, you have to work to keep it. And right now we're being challenged to work it. It's not like we've never had problems before. We lived through the 1960s when we were assassinating political leaders in this nation, when we had riots that were burning down neighborhoods and cities. So the nation has faced these kinds of crises in the past. So I guess I have faith that we can face this one too. But in order to face a problem, you have to see the problem. You have to know the problem. And now those polls that you've quoted, people are starting to see the problem and know the problem. And then we can come up with the fix of the problem and do the kinds of things we talk about. Patriotism demands that you do those kinds of things and you do them correctly. And she's absolutely right, that you are willing, you take an oath, you're willing to do those kinds of things. And it's not about political parties. I agree, 100%. Didn't matter what party you were from.
Well, I thank you both so much for sharing your insights based on your experience and training. And I think in a broad sense, thank you both for your service that you've done as a police chief, as a prosecutor, and a county executive. And it'll be interesting to maybe hold this conversation a year or two from now. Thank you again very much, and thank you, each of you, for tuning into this edition of Challenge 2.0.